So welcome to everybody and those that are watching on catch up as well. So this is my fourth talk in a series I'm doing on identity and who we are. We thought about in the first talk about identity lost, about the fact that in the fall, back in the Garden of Eden, we lost our sense of who we really are as we lost that connection with God. Then we thought about the fact that we are new. No, we didn't. We thought about the fact that we are made in the image of God, secondly. And then thirdly, last time we talked about being new creations. And this morning I'm going on to probably what I would think is the most fundamental and crucial part of our identity. And that is that we are made children of God. And this is the most amazing, wonderful thing. And yet it's who we've been made in God and through Christ and through what he's done for us in the story of redemption. And you know, as I think I've said before, that who we think we are and who we understand we are really matters, because it affects our thought patterns, it affects how we behave, and what we do, and so fundamentally. So understanding this truth is of key importance to us, and it's, for me, was revolutionary when I first began to realise that this was who I am and who he'd made me. Even though sometimes, because again of our culture and our upbringing, sometimes it's actually hard to believe it. It's hard to actually get a handle of it and think, can this really be true of me? Can I be a child of God? And what I think we need to have it as almost our first point of reference, so that whenever I'm thinking about who I am, you know, and as the storms of life happen and as stuff happens, it's almost just standing in that and holding it and saying, no, that's my first point of reference as to who I am. I'm a child of God. And when, you know, people say all sorts of other stuff about me, it's what I can stand on really and hold on to, and in the times of temptation and in the times of stress and so on, I just try and quieten my heart and my spirit and come back to the fact that I'm a child of God and I can rest in that. So I would say that this is probably the radical heart of the gospel, really. And it is radical. It is completely radical. If most people, I guess if you ask a straw poll of people as to what's the heart of Christianity, what it's about, they'd probably say, oh, it's, you know, if you, not Christians, but in the world, they'd probably say, oh, it's about you just trying to be good to please God or whatever. I don't think many would say it's about being a child of God, because it's just not understood. But that's what it is, the radical heart of the gospel. And it's the great revelation that Jesus came to bring. And you know, it's that when he said in his, you know, when the disciples asked him how to pray, and he said, he began it by saying, you know, say Abba, Father. It's that intimate word that, as we'll see in a moment, became part of the psyche and the culture of the early church. It was written on their hearts. This intimate word in Aramaic for dad. It was completely revolutionary. There was nothing like that in the previous Old Testament culture. So I'm going to be thinking about what it means to be adopted as sons and daughters, and that is crucial for us. This is my quote for today. You know, I'd like a quote. Are you going to work? Please work. If the battery's gone.
It's quite short.
Sorry?
It looks quite short.
Yes, it is short quote. It's not going to play for some reason. Thanks, Paul. Right. Back up. It's Paul. So yeah, a guy called Sinclair Ferguson said this: the notion that we are children of God, his own sons and daughters, is the mainspring of Christian living. Our sonship to God is the apex of creation and the goal of redemption. I rather like that, and it's beautifully true. And yet, you know, this is probably the area that we get challenged in most. It's the one area the enemy really doesn't want us to hold on to. It's interesting to me, thinking about to Jesus' temptations, that in the first two of them, the devil says to Jesus, if you are God's son. He doesn't say on the third one, but on the first two temptations, he says, if you're God's son. And it's like he's saying, is that really who you are? And that's constantly what he's playing at with us. He's constantly saying, look at this, look at that. If you were God's son, if you're God's daughter, this wouldn't happen, or you wouldn't have done this or that. So it's a battle for our hearts and minds, particularly a battle for our thinking. And so it's important that we stand on it, really. That's what I'm trying to do. So we have, I think I'm trying to use this, and it probably won't. Did I do that or did you do that?
I did that.
Oh, you did that. I'll put it down. If I put it away, I won't be tempted to try it. This is from John chapter 1, the prologue of John's Gospel. He says, "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you receive does not make..." No, actually, there should be a reading before this, Paul. I think. Yeah, this is it. "He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of a human decision or a husband's will, but born of God." And it's interesting that passage right at the beginning is almost the first thing that he talks about Jesus coming, but it's the first bit of theology about relating to us that John talks about, and it's immediately about this whole thing about children of God. So moving on to the next reading, this is from Romans 8, and Paul describing about adoption. He says, "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children." Move on. "Now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Okay. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God." And then one final verse, this is from 1 John 3. "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know him." So, let me say something first of all about adoption, because it's something that was very interesting in the Roman Empire. It wasn't much done in Hebrew culture, but in the Roman Empire, adoption was quite a common thing, particularly for those of the sort of more wealthy elite and the more powerful people in the Roman Empire. Because often they would have a lot of money, and yet many of them, of course, because of the difficulties of childbirth in those days, and the fact that in that part of the fallenness of the culture it was only sons that could inherit. And so, that limited kind of the options in terms of an heir. So many wealthy and powerful Romans didn't have a natural heir to their estate, and so they would adopt. Sometimes a more distant relative, sometimes even, occasionally, a really favoured slave or servant would be adopted and made into the son, the heir of the estate. So this is kind of the background that Paul has in mind, and I kind of, as I'm thinking about Paul writing this in Romans 8, I'm kind of thinking about some kind of really powerful Roman with with a big estate in a big villa, mosaics on the floor and baths we need those today, don't we? But anyway, so it's quite a wealthy estate, and the owner has no heir, and so he's adopting someone to become his heir. It's not a, before you hear me out, it's not a gender thing here that Paul is talking about. And he gets a lot of stick, Paul, sometimes, because he used the language of his day, of course, which was about males. And it was only male heirs and the oldest male heir that could inherit the estate. But Paul is actually saying something really, really radical. And he's saying that whether you are male or female, and in fact in the Galatians passage that he uses where he also talks about adoptions, it comes after the bit where he says there's neither slave nor free, male nor female, and so on. And what he's saying radically is that all of us, no matter what our gender, we're all like the heir of the estate. And it's a status thing, that's what he's saying, that you have this wonderful new status. So, bear with me on that. So moving on, how does adoption happen? In verse 9, the bit before in Romans 8, we didn't read this bit, but he says this, you, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but you are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. And then he goes on to say in verse 14, for those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. So yeah. Go again. You might have to use the arrows. That's it. It's that middle one. Yeah. So, how does adoption happen? If you could go again. So he says three things here which stand together. He says, firstly of all, we belong to Christ. That's what he said in verse 9. We come to Christ in faith. So that's Paul's way of saying when you become a Christian, you belong to Christ. He says at that point we receive the Spirit. And then he also says when we receive the Spirit, we become God's child. So those are three, go again, inseparable thoughts in Paul's mind, that they all belong together. Either all are true or none are true. That's what he's basically saying. You can't split one off and say, well, I became a Christian, but I didn't receive the Spirit, or I became a Christian, but I didn't become a child of God. Because in Paul's mind, those three things happen simultaneously. We put our faith in Jesus, we receive the Spirit, and we become children of God. And it's a done deal. And it's like the greatest deal you'll ever get. It's better than buy one, get one free. It's not even buy one, get two free, because it's all free. So it's the greatest deal on the planet. This is that all you do is you believe in him, you receive the Spirit, and you become a child of God. It's as simple as that. And you get all. So it's not this idea that certain people get this and others don't, or whatever. There's no two-level Christianity in this. Paul says if anyone does this, if this happens, this happens. This is how it is. So it's just an amazing thing that we, through grace, as we put our faith in Jesus, we become children of the Father. And I love the fact that this is very Trinitarian. It's as we belong to Jesus, it's through Jesus' work on the cross and in the resurrection. And then we receive the Spirit, but then it's the Spirit that as we'll see later, gives us this assurance of adoption, and we become the Father's children. Beautifully Trinitarian. So, that's how it happens. You don't have to do anything for it, except believe. It's just a done deal on the cross for us, and it's the most amazing thing. So what are the implications for us? Well, the first one is that if we're adopted, then there must have been a time when we were lost. when we were estranged, if you like. We thought a bit about that last week, but there must have been a time when we were estranged from God. And I think that's probably, if I was to analyse culture and where we are as a culture, the most damaging thing to us as human beings has been the fact that we've lost who we are, and we've lost that sense of fatherhood in God, and that crucial key relationship that we were made for. It's what we were designed for. And so when we've lost that, we have what we term, sometimes theologians term, an orphan spirit. Within us we feel this longing for something, and that's what the world has. It has this longing for a father. It has that longing that's inbuilt within us to be back in that relationship. And it's the result of so much that is wrong in our world, because we try and fill that longing and that need in all sorts of other ways. And so we look to fill that father gap, if you like, with all sorts of stuff and achievements and whatever you can think of, really, that gets in the way. So there was this idea that we were once lost, and we know that that's true, and yet we've been now found by this Father who loves us. Secondly, it's a grace gift. I've already said that, so I won't.
And a good morning to you. I'm trying to turn it off.
There's Holy Spirit speaking, really.
Good morning.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that idea that we're given this gift. In the John passage in John 1, it says we're given the right, he says, to become children of God. We're given the right to become children of God. So we don't earn a father, do we, or a mother? We don't sort of apply for one. We don't try and impress one. And if in our culture, as still happens, with adoptions, the child doesn't, they're on a register, of course, and so on, but they don't directly appeal to whoever adopts them. It's a choice by the family, and a costly choice very often to adopt the child, and to give them a home and to love them. And that's what God's done for us. It's a costly choice that He's made to adopt us. So, moving on. Privileges of adoption. And there are a number, I think, that come out of this passage in Romans 8. And the first one is security. And that's from this verse 15. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. It's that idea of, we don't have a relationship with God anymore that's based around fear. And it's interesting that Paul, in both the Galatians passage and this one, where he's writing about adoption, he contrasts it with being a slave, having the identity of a slave. That's really interesting, because a slave has no security. A slave in the Roman Empire was completely at the whim of their owner. I mean, they weren't even a person, really, in their own right. And we know the terrible cost of slavery over the years, and still happens. But they have no rights, no personal identity, no choice, and it's all based on fear. And of course, if the slave tried to run away, that was probably punishable by death, unless the slave owner was particularly lenient. So they had a relationship based on fear. But Paul says you no longer have that. You don't live in fear. The spirit of adoption, that we're sons and daughters, enables us to live in security. In fact, when Paul talks about the spirit of adoption, he uses the combination of two Greek words, which means son and secured position. So he's saying to you, look, you're in a secure position now. And when we think about security, we think about all sorts of things. And we think, wrongly of course, that things like money and power and position and so on will bring us security. There's a national lottery thing at the moment where you can win, I think it's £10,000 every month for 30 years, and they call it Set for Life. So it's that idea that will make you secure. And if you have £10,000 every month coming into your bank account, then, well, you know, that's it. But of course, it's only a half truth because, you know, stuff happens in life that even £10,000 a month if into your bank account won't sort out. And interestingly, Jesus' comment on that kind of way of thinking was, if you remember the parable, the guy who tried to build bigger barns, he says, "You fool." So, you know, that isn't where it's at. The security we need really is one that is in that father-child relationship. And it's the security that goes beyond anything else. That even if my whole world falls apart, I still have that. And that, because he's the creator of the universe, the most powerful and loving force in the universe, the person that I really need most of all, and if everything else goes, I still have that. And that's what gives me security. And it goes beyond the grave. So we have security, we have authority. Taking that same verse again, the slave son bit. You know, in the estate, what happens is that as a child in a great estate, you have certain authority. I think of many of you probably saw Downton Abbey when it was on. It was a very, very popular series, and I think of one of those sort of country estates. And if you know the series, you know it's very much behind the scenes of what the servants were up to and all the rest of it, as well as the lord and lady and the children. But it's the children that had authority. You know, the servants in that kind of environment didn't have any authority. But I can't remember her name, but Lady, what's her name, the daughter, she had authority. And even when, interestingly, as an interesting parallel to this, there was in the storyline, if you know it, there was an Irish guy who was a chauffeur, and obviously he was just a servant. But he fell in love with and eventually married the younger daughter, who subsequently died. But sad story. But, all the rest of it. But he became part of the family, and eventually he ran the estate. He was like the estate manager, and they adopted him as a son, and it was a wonderful. And it's a great parallel to what Paul is talking about. But he had authority then to go and say to the other servants, do this, do that, whatever. So we have that same kind of authority that God gives us as sons and daughters. Authority over the powers of evil. So we can tell the enemy to go, and he has to go, not because we have any inherent power, but because we have received it through Jesus and through our son and daughtership. And we have authority to bring in the kingdom of God, as he directs us. We can when he gives us authority to pronounce things and they happen in the kingdom. So I need to remember that's a wonderful implication of being a son and daughter. Thirdly, intimacy, and there should be another line that comes up. And this comes from that the Abba Father bit, and by him we cry, Abba Father, Paul says. And again, I just want to stress that the amazing privilege it is to be able to call the one who created everything Dad and Abba. And it was that intimate term that was an Aramaic word and yet seems to have become fixed into the Greek church. This is a church of Greeks that Paul is writing to. And yet he's still using this same word, Abba Father. Implying that by him, it is something that had become part of the culture of the churches that were planted and as the kingdom spread, that they kept calling God by this wonderful intimate name of Abba and Dad. And that's almost what Paul is saying, that's the norm for you and me, that we can do that. And it's a wonderful privilege that we have this journey into intimacy with him. So don't be afraid to call him Father and Dad. Because he loves it, and we can come and do things like sit on his knee and let him hug us and all those kind of things, which seem amazing, but we are. That's who we are. We're his children who he loves so much. I need to press on. Assurance. Again, there should be a verse with that. So he says the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children, that we are God's children. That's Paul answering the question, well, how do I know? How do I know this in my heart and mind that this is who I am? And he says that wonderfully, the Holy Spirit does this amazing work where he comes to testify to us. It's again using the sort of language of a law court where a witness is called and the witness gives some evidence and it's a done deal. You know, it's kind of, they were there, whatever was going on, they were there, and they saw what happened, and it clinches it. And one of the most beautiful things that the Holy Spirit does is he comes to us and enables us to be assured. He testifies something deep. It's a mystery. It is a mystery, but something deep within us understands this wonderful identity that we've been given through Jesus, that we've become children of God. And I know that's happened to me, and it keeps happening to me because I keep needing to understand it. And it's often in those moments when I need it most that the Holy Spirit just comes and does his work within my heart and mind and spirit. And in my deepest need, he comes and just envelops me with his love, and I'm reminded again that I'm his child, and that's where I am. Inheritance. Now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. Beautiful language. I'm still trying to work out what he means by co-heirs with Christ. I mean, doesn't that kind of astound you? I mean, what does that really mean? I'm not sure I can fully get my head around that, but to be heirs, I think it just means that it's that assurance that we are going to inherit all of the beauty of the kingdom of God in all its fullness. We don't see it yet, but we're going to get it. It's what's to come. It's the hope of the future. So we're assured that, one day we will inherit new bodies. We will live in the new kingdom, the new heaven and the new earth, in the presence of God, when everything will be working in sync. Everything will be working as it should be. There'll be no relational dysfunction. There'll be no rivalry or jealousy. Everything will be surrounded in this beautiful world of love and peace. And yet there will still be so much to do. It will be the world functioning as it was always designed back in Eden. And that's what's to come. That's what the promise of being heirs with Christ is. And we will get to be part of that new world and rule it with Christ, and develop it with Christ. Because I think that's still what we will do. And whatever you enjoy most in this world now, they will still be there. So if you like great coffee, I'm sure that'll be there. If you like parties and stuff, that'll be there. It's just that wholeness, that shalom that will be what's coming for us. And we can't even imagine it now because of the dysfunction in our world, but it's what's coming. That's what our inheritance is. And it's interesting, I did in the earlier passage, carried on with that bit where it talks about creation being frustrated and waiting for the kingdom, for the children of God to be revealed. That's such an amazing phrase again of Paul. That he said, all of creation is waiting for us. It's waiting for us. It's waiting for Jesus to come again and for us to come fully into who we are. Amazing. Now, I thought, discipline, you might not think this is a privilege of adoption, but actually it is. And it's hinted at in verse 17. He says, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. And discipline actually is a privilege of being a son and daughter. I mean, there's that passage in Hebrews 12 where he talks about the fact that we all get disciplined by God. In fact, it's interesting that Maggie chose that song, Light the Fire Again, because there's not many songs actually, and it's an old Vineyard one, which I love, but there's not many songs actually which mention discipline. But you notice it was in there this morning. He says in the line, I need your discipline, come light the fire again. And we do. I need, a loving parent actually. We all know, for those of you who are parents as well, discipline is part of what we need. Lovingly, of course. The trouble with the word discipline is that we also all immediately have the connotations of bad discipline. But that's not who God is, of course. And he disciplines us in all sorts of ways, but it's a part of the privilege of adoption. Now, he delays things sometimes for us because he knows that's best. And, for all of us who've had kids, we know sometimes they ask for stuff that they need to wait for because they're not ready for it. As hard as that is for them, we know that's for the best. And in all sorts of ways that, we go through stuff that is a way of disciplining us. And by disciplining, it's just about growth. It's about becoming more and more who he wants us to be. And that often only happens in the cauldron of difficulty and hardship. But it's part of his love, and it's part of being children of God. So I've come to, although I don't welcome it, I've come to kind of think, okay, when it's happening, yes, God, what are you teaching me? What are you teaching me through this? And submitting to it. Last one, and the last privilege of being a child of God is that we're just loved. This is the 1 John bit, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And just on that, if you move to the last slide, I think there's one more. Oh no, there isn't. Sorry, I obviously didn't do a slide for this. But anyway, just that idea of being loved, and again, having this picture of, if you like, the sort of, I don't know, Downton Abbey estate or something, or a Roman estate. I imagine in Paul's mind that the Lord or rich Roman or whatever, he has in mind that the child who's been adopted is going to be invested in. So it's like, they're going to get the best education, they're going to get, be taught to read and write and all the rest of it, and because the father that's adopted the child wants them to come into their full potential. That's what I'm trying to get at, very badly. But anyway, that's part of the love, is that our Father actually invests in us. And that again is an amazing thought, that he wants to see us flourish and thrive and come into our full potential. But that's what parents do, isn't it? Good parents. I know that there's a lot of bad parenting, but the good parenting that we've experienced, we know that we want our children to thrive. We invest in them, we give them our time, we give them our energy and our resources. And that's what God does as our Father. And that's part of what receiving the Spirit is all about. It's the resources of the Father to be who we need to be. And I mentioned this before recently, but I think another important part of being loved is that God is our cheerleader. I don't know whether you ever think about God as that, but I've begun to. It's something that he's laid on my heart a lot recently, that he's my cheerleader, and he's cheering me on all the time. And it's not kind of the natural way we think of God, particularly depending on your Christian upbringing and there's a lot of stuff out in the church that wouldn't ever go there. But I was with my youngest son a couple of weeks ago, and he'd been to a couple of his daughter's sports days, and we've all been there, haven't we? For those who've got kids at school, you go to sports day. It's a bit of a chore, really, and particularly if you like me, you're concerned that they're going to have a dad's race. You think, oh, yeah. But really, you go to cheer them on, don't you? And whatever your child does, you just rooting for them, and you encourage them and you cheer them on. You're on the sidelines, and some parents go over the top with it. I know, but we wouldn't do that, of course. But that's our Father. He's kind of the biggest cheerleader we have. He's always cheering us on, encouraging us, and it's far easier, I think, to win his approval than we think. It really is. When I've often, this is my way of thinking. You can see I still need healing. But I've often thought with that parable where you get the talents and the call to account, and the father said, or the estate owner says, what do you do with my talents? And the one says, I've earned 10 more, or I've earned 5 more. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. It's that well done. And I've often thought, I'm never going to get that. I'm never going to get that. But God's been working in me, and through things people have said, I think that well done will come much more easy than we think. And the well done isn't always about, just those things that are very visible in the kingdom, in terms of, you helped so many people become Christian, or, gave so many wonderful, accurate prophecies or healings or whatever. And those are all great things, and he'll say well done for them, I'm sure. But often the well done will just be that actually you stood. You stood in all the world throughout you, and all the enemy throughout you, and you still loved me, and you were still there. And that's my well done, because that's, in the end, that's an amazing thing. That all the world throws at us, and we hold on to him as our Father. I get emotional about that, because I just think that's who he is. He's far more. He sees all of that stuff as well, all that stuff that we perhaps don't associate with victories in the kingdom, but they are. They're overcoming the world. And lastly, of course, it's just that care and provision that he gives us, that we know that we have somebody who will provide for us. That's what fathers and mothers do for their kids. They provide for them, they care for them. And we don't need to be in that position of fear. It's part of the security thing that God will provide for us. And I've known that in amazing ways, and I've told some of my story about that before. At the moment, I was once out of work for 12 months, and twice in that period of 12 months, I didn't have any money to pay the next mortgage instalment. And some money came to us once just through a cheque, and another time through £600 of cash stuck in an envelope, and I never know, even to this day, where it came from. God knew, and he's amazing. So, I'm done. Let's stand.